Hello everyone, welcome to my review of Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. Now that I've finally completed the game, I feel free to give a review. So how this episode's going to work, this is totally unscripted, this is just me kind of blabbing. I'm going to try to keep most of my non-spoiler comments at the start of the episode. I'll give a brief warning when I move into spoiler territory, and then from there it's probably going to be a mix, but mostly spoilers. Anyways, what are my overall thoughts on the game? I know I've been rather harsh with games like Fort Solis, but I'm going to take a line that was used by Master Assassin when reviewing God of War Ragnarok. That was a pretty good video, by the way. Recommend you check it out. The best thing that a sequel can do, and I'm paraphrasing here, is take what was good in the first game and improve upon it. Space Marine 2 took what was good in the first game and improved upon it. Now, it didn't do that entirely. There are obviously little nitpicks with like enemy types and the lack of fleshed out characters that aren't Space Marines. But those are two things that are pretty understandable for a hack and slash. And in their roadmap, they did mention, hey, we're coming out with new enemy types. And to be fair, there's still a lot more enemy variety than there was in the original Space Marine, and I have played both. I also feel like another thing that Space Marine 2 did really well was keeping things fresh while harkening back to old stuff. And there were a lot of parts that felt to me exactly like Space Marine. A couple of the twists, the shift in how the fighting occurred, yet they kept it unique. Instead of just fighting on Graia, we're fighting on multiple different planets. There are different defined phases. And ultimately, a very interesting conclusion, even though the ending in this game, like in the last game, ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, making me think that there's going to be, if not more missions, then a third game, and this will become a trilogy. But other things that this game did really well, the graphics and the cutscenes are amazing. Sorry, I can't get over how good, especially the last couple of cutscenes were very, very good. I also feel like the PvE mode, where you can go into multiplayer with friends, for anyone who's wondering what the general layout of this is, you have the main story, which you can do in co-op or solo, and then you have essentially side missions, which again, you can do co-op and solo. They tie into the main story, and I mean, you really need to play those missions to get the full scale of, or the full context of what's going on. I did kind of feel frustrated that there's no way to turn voice chat off. I didn't realize this until the end, or like halfway through doing the missions. Not the end, halfway through. So I ended up just being silent when I recorded those, so I wasn't interrupting other people's gameplay. Would be nice for them to add an option to turn off voice chat, instead of just muting it. But, I mean, that's a pretty small nitpick. The other thing that kind of frustrated me was sometimes you'd have dialogue talking over, you'd have like random kind of comments between the Marines, as well as the mission objective dialogue going. I feel like that was something they could have fixed. But other than that, I didn't really have a lot of problems with the PvE mode. Also, would have been nice if they had been a little bit more explicit about the customization. Took me a little while to figure it out as a dum-dum. But yeah, I've got to say, I had a lot of fun. Now, in terms of the campaign itself, they did a very good job with the prologue, tying us right back into the main game. And the ending was very, very good. I also feel like the pacing of the story was quite nice. It was varied. There were times where it was quite calm, and then there were times where it got really intense, and I just had to play more, had to play more, had to play more. And the soundtracks were just amazing. The music that plays at the end of missions is some of my favorite music in video games. It's just so good. It's like an old friend almost. I also like the little quotes that they would play or put at the start of each mission briefing, which was pretty nice. I just wish you had a little bit more things going on in the background of the battle barge. That's a mini spoiler. You are on a battle barge for part of it, but I don't think that's too big of a spoiler. I wish there were more things to do in the background. But, I mean, there were so many times when you're on planet where you could just look around and there's something to see and admire. I mean, it was so good. Now, from here on out, oh yeah, one more thing, weapon types. Each weapon definitely felt unique from each other. There were certain weapon types where I felt really comfortable with, and then there were certain weapon types where I felt, I do not like this at all, which is how it should be. There should be weapon types you're more comfortable with and weapon types that you aren't. If you're comfortable with all of them, that's a bad sign, because it means they probably handle pretty similar to each other. And from here on out, I'm going to start mixing in spoilers. So, I've got to say, like I mentioned, this game, I almost wish I had played Space Marine 2 and then went back and played Space Marine 1. The reason being, there's so many hints and allusions to Space Marine 1, especially with Titus and his two companions, Sergeant Gadriel and Brother Chiron. Brother Chiron, Sergeant Gadriel, don't really know much about Titus. The records regarding Titus's service have been removed, and he's kind of a mystery. And the chaplain has supported this. So they don't really know what's up with him. As a result, Gadriel pretty easily gets turned against us in some regard, more and more, until Chiron steps in and reveals a heretic trick. And from there on, you start to see some real character growth in Gadriel, and you also see character growth in Titus. And I think that's a really good thing, because you don't see a lot of character growth in Space Marine 1. There is definite character growth in Space Marine 2. I also thought that I keep on forgetting her name. I think it's Sarkona. The Cadian commander was a lot better in her role as commander than Lieutenant Mira, but that's just a personal thing. I think when I first encountered Sarkona on Kodaku, I was immediately impressed. I mean, it felt like a soldier was talking to me and commanding the battlefield, and that just wasn't something I felt from Mira. She was too soft-spoken, too seemingly fragile. And I think part of that had to do with just how bulky they made the Space Marines in Space Marine 1. Something that kind of toned down in Space Marine 2, even though arguably it should have been the inversion. Space Marine 1, Space Marines should have been kind of slightly bigger with some gigantism compared to the humans or the Cadians. Whereas Space Marine 2, they should have been massive and hulking because, well, they're all Primaris. But it's not so, and that's a tad bit frustrating to me. But again, it's another nitpick. There were also some really nice side characters that you met. I felt like again, Sarkona was a really good one. The sergeant that you meet on Avarax, who gets killed in that ambush after he finds it, or recognizes it, was really nice. And I will say, they kind of pulled their old trick with the, oh, you're fighting a Xenos race. Oh, switch, it's now Chaos. It's Chaos all along. But they did it in a very different way. It wasn't Nemeroth just bashing down doors. It was a lot more subtle and more planned out. And I've got to say, I'm sure there are probably some people who complain like, oh my god, Imra did all this stuff, and it was all Imra, by the way, being the boss. If you didn't want to spoil, or if you didn't play the game, just want spoilers. All just to entrap Calgar, how blah blah blah. That's perfect. Like, that perfectly encapsulates both a servant of Tzeentch and Chaos. Chaos sets out the most elaborate plots for the pettiest of things, and that is the exact kind of plot the Changer of Ways would support. It's kind of frustrating Imra's fate is left up in question, with the implication being that he's sent back to Tzeentch in failure again. I would have preferred to have either killed him or had him say something like, no, not again, or something like that. I don't know. Just something that would have given us a more definite hint as to what his fate is. And mind you, even him being banished to Tzeentch, there's every chance Tzeentch just turns him into a Chaos spawn. Another thing that kind of frustrated me with the main story was the Hellbrutes. Out of all of the traitor legions, the Thousand Sons should not have Hellbrutes. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me that they have Hellbrutes. Using Rubric Marines was a great idea. Utilizing Hellbrutes was not. I feel like it would have been better if the Hellbrutes had been from like some kind of random sorcerer's warband, and we had to kill that sorcerer while we were advancing on Imra somewhere in the campaign, and the Hellbrutes kind of went feral. That would have been nice. Or like Imra took control of them. like somewhere on Avarax, instead of having to fight Imrador in a faux boss fight, he like gloats, villain monologues, then leaves the sorcerer to us. We kill the sorcerer, and Imrador takes control of his forces. It would have allowed for a little bit more enemy variation, I think, and it also would have been quite nice to see Hellbrutes in a way that, like, for me didn't have that wait, why are the Hellbrutes moment. I also think that it was a really good job of them to bring back the power source from Gaia the way they did and show that Lures was manipulated, but the core of his research was sound. I did like that. I also really liked Gadriel by the end. I think Gadriel has a bright future ahead of him. He's analytical, tactical, thinking. I also found it pretty nice to see him stepping up. And I really like to see that Titus and Calgar apparently were at least friendly with each other. And Calgar actually apparently liked Titus enough that he was apparently the one that got us out of the Death Watch. I also find it pretty interesting that we got, or at least in my headcanon, we got closure to Uldfar from Rogue Trader, killed by Tyranids while serving in the Death Watch. That was really interesting, and it was a good idea for them to send Titus to the Death Watch as a Black Shield. It made sense. He was tested for Chaos Corruption, obviously can't reclaim captaincy, so he's got to go somewhere. Why not send him to the Death Watch as a Black Shield? I also feel like, personally, it makes sense that Leandros would have done everything possible to make sure that Titus is dishonored. I feel like he didn't just oppose Titus because of his methods, but he just didn't like, or because of his warp resistance, he just didn't like Titus's methods. Titus was too flexible for him. And it was nice to see how Gadriel started going down that path and then kind of changed. My favorite line was, Codex Astartes does not support this action. Direct quote from Leandros, but I don't mind it, or like, but I'm looking forward to it. From Gadriel, you could see Titus, you could see the PTSD in his mind, and then the smile, and it clearly showed in the fact that the two had some genuine conversations. But yeah, it was nice to see Titus kind of recognize his mistakes from Space Marine. Because he did make mistakes. Not all of it was on Leandros' shoulders. Just as not all of it was on the Clan Father's shoulders, aka Shadrach Medusan's betrayal. Shadrach Medusan should have never had Og as his second in command. The Clan Father should have been dealt with, punished, locked away, and Autek Moore watched by loyalists by loyalists who were loyal to Shadrach first and foremost. Sorry, in case you can't tell, I really liked that character and was really pissed off they killed him off in the way they did, especially. Would have been so nice to see Medusan on the walls of Terra. I also like the references to the Great Crusade. I did, however, have some questions about Chiron. I'm assuming based off the way they discussed it, Chiron was a child during the massacre of Calth. How does this add up in the timeline? Because we know that Call worked for 10,000 years on Primaris Marines, but it didn't seem like he spent all that time just building Primaris Marines. To me, it seemed like he spent at least 8,000 years trying to successfully create Primaris Marines, with, I'd say, something like the Curse Founding, or like a couple of these foundings, some wacky Space Marine chapters like the Carcharodons, could be the result of his work and him testing it out in the field. At least that's my headcanon. It would have been really nice for them to have explained a little bit more of Chiron's backstory, because also, even if he was selected to be in Astartes, it took him a few years to get back to Calth, and if he was a boy when Calth was attacked, it seems like he'd be a little bit too old to become a Primaris Marine. But I do like the reference, or the idea that he was in stasis for quite a while. We do know there were a lot of Primaris Marines that were in stasis for a while. It was also nice, in my opinion, to see that some time has passed since Primaris were released. Gadriel marks like almost two decades. So I guess it's been about 20 years since the fall of Cadia. This does lead to the question of how are so many Cadians alive that massive regiments like the Cadian 8th are still massive regiments? My guess is out in a war zone, set down roots, and other worlds are becoming new Cadias, but that's just me. I also like how Gadriel, when Gadriel does get manipulated by Imura, Chiron is able to recognize Warp Taint. And it, again, adds some character development that's reflected back on at Demirium. But yeah, ultimately, this game was just so much fun. I have a lot of nitpicks, but they're just that, nitpicks. And seeing and finding out that the chaplain was Leandros, after so many little hints, that kind of made me think, okay, Leandros is going to show up in this game somehow. He has to. And then when I was kind of thinking back over some of the chaplain's lines, it's Leandros. And then that reveal, it is indeed Leandros. I really want to see how the relationship between the two develops, especially because Calgar seems broadly to have been the one who taught us to be the way we were in Space Marine. And that gets me to my final point, is the dynamic between Titus and the two, his two supporting Space Marines great, my brain broke. In Space Marine 2 versus Space Marine 1. They felt very different by the end. There was no real Sidonis in Space Marine 2, nor should they be. It was clear that Sidonis and Titus were very close, had fought for a while. Titus is very closed, insular, not really talking about much, not revealing much in Space Marine 2, and it really wouldn't have made sense for like Chiron to be the new Sidonis. On the other hand, Gadriel at first seems like the new Leandros, and I feel like Titus kind of felt that way. But he came to recognize that there are fundamental differences between Gadriel and Leandros, despite both being inexperienced and feeling somewhat similar. And ultimately, it shows. The dynamic between Gadriel and Titus is very different between the dynamic, or compared to the dynamic between Leandros and Titus. I will say, I really wish we had Chiron and Gadriel coming with us. I would have loved to have seen more character development from them, and I felt that they worked very well with us. I also kind of wish, this is my preferred ending, that Akaran had died and Calgar bestowed second company on us again. It would have set up a really nice conflict with Leandros, who is a chaplain now. So how would he react to the guy who probably got him, at least set down the path to becoming a chaplain, now becoming, once again, the captain of second company? Because it's good Calgar likes us. It was also pretty funny, once again, seeing, that Imura's whole plan was just to entrap Calgar. That was hilarious. And it was nice. It was nice to see Titus's warp resistance coming into play again. It would have been nice to have gotten an answer. The best answer I could think of is that he's a blank, not a pariah with the absence of a soul, but a pariah with the actually I can't remember if it's an absence or inverted that causes pain to psychers. I think it's an absence that causes pain to psychers, whereas inverted is, I could be wrong though. But it feels like it's one or the other. That would explain how he's still somewhat affected by warp powers. Whichever the one is that just causes neutrality towards warp powers would explain his resistance while not being immune to them. But yeah, this is where my review ends. I got really into spoilers there, but overall, I definitely give it a 5 stars out of 5 stars and a 9 out of 10 if I were rating it out of 10. Definitely a must-play game. It is so worth it. And I'm super hyped for the next development in Titus's story. So thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed. And it was so fun playing Space Marine 2. For the people who are wondering, hey, when is the rest of your Space Marine playthrough going to release? Because I know I'm releasing this before the rest of the playthrough comes out. An episode a day until the final episode, essentially. That's how it's gonna go. This is going to be released, hopefully, with an episode. Let me quickly check. I believe it'll be episode number 10 that comes out, but I want to make sure that I'm right. Because, yeah, I had a lot of problems remembering what episode was what. Yeah, episode 10. Hopefully this will come out with episode 10, but I'm not entirely sure if it will. So, yeah, thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.